Hey there, everybody. It has been a little while since we have had a nice talk about tropes, archetypes, recurring things that come up in film that kind of brush around the edges of LGBTQ plus representation. And this time I do mean brush around the edges, because what we're going to talk about today is not explicitly about LGBTQ plus characters, although I think if you talk to a lot of LGBTQ plus people, particularly folks around my age and older, there's going to be a decent number of them who will have at some point in their life found connection to the character archetype we're going to talk about today. That is the tomboy. So before we get too far along on this, we of course need to define the tomboy as best we can. This is of course not an academic definition. This is a working definition from looking at examples that clearly fit the archetype and figuring out the commonalities. Broad strokes is that a tomboy is going to be a female character who possesses a fairly large number of traditionally masculine traits and or interests. Now, the specifics of this can run the gamut. It can be anywhere from a more masculine sense of dress and a shorter haircut to an interest in sports, being in the military, being generally more physically aggressive than is normally allotted to female characters, and that sort of thing normally reserved for men, being, a bit more rude, laid back, very unrefined. Those sorts of things tend to feed into a tomboy archetype. Now, if some of the things that I've talked about actually sound familiar, I have kind of talked about this before. If you saw my video on gay coding, what I said in that video was that gay coding usually starts from a baseline of taking a character and imbuing them with traits normally associated with the opposing gender. And for the sake of this, I trust me, I know there's more than just two genders. So when I say opposing, understand I'm saying if male, then opposing is female. If female, then the opposing is male. I'm aware of the spectrum. Trust me, I know. But in any case, that was my general broad strokes. But I did note in that video that with female characters who exert male characteristics, that is usually not enough on its own to gay code them, because it may simply mark them as a tomboy. Now, I didn't go into tomboys too much there, but I'm going to here. And part of the reason I brought it up there was because to feel that a female character was properly gay coded, they really kind of had to be paired with another female character who was going to serve as the prospective love interest, even if unconfirmed. So Xena and Gabrielle, that's kind of your archetypical example. And if there wasn't probably getting with that one additional character, then it could just be chalked up as a tomboy. Tomboys are also not new. They've been around for a long, long time. Pretty much as long as there's been cinema, and even before that. The character of Jo March from Little Women, arguably one of the archetypical tomboys. Plus, there are tons of examples that we will get into as we go along. But those are your broad strokes. A female character who does identify as female. So this isn't a transgender thing. So with that understanding, let's look at a few examples, and then we'll talk about some commonalities and some of the things that tend to be implied with the way that this trope and archetype gets used. Now, before we get into it too far, I do want to give a special thanks to Carolyn, who is one of my mods if you're ever on my live stream, and a good friend of mine who did help me come up with some additional examples beyond the initial ones I thought of, and she caught some really big ones that I missed, so special thanks. So some of the examples that people might be familiar with would include the Bad News Bears. Both versions, but I think the original embodies it a little bit better. We have RoboCop and the partner character there. There's Big Hero 6 with Go-Go. There's Hard Candy and Ellen Page's character in that. League of Their Own, of course. Obviously, Kit being the big one, but there's more than a few in there as well. Merida in Brave. Rey from the last few Star Wars movies. Ace from Doctor Who, both Arya Stark and Brienne of Tarth from Game of Thrones, Vasquez from Aliens, and honestly pretty much Jodie Foster's entire acting career prior to being in Taxi Driver. Pretty much all fall under the tomboy archetype. Now, if you already know these characters, you might already know some of the things that I'm going to point out, because there is a little bit more going on with these than just the fact that they are girls showing masculine interests or tendencies. As I get into some elements of this archetype that are going to be somewhat critical, please understand, this is not a condemnation of tomboys. I love tomboy characters. I love tomboys in real life. But much as when I talked about gay coding and even the bury your gays trope, individual instances may be very good. But there are aspects of it as a trend, as a recurring thing, that have elements that really are kind of what I want to dig into. The first thing that you may have noticed, the majority of the examples I cited, and I think if you look at most sort of lists of tomboy characters, they skew young. Tomboy characters, more often than not, tend to be school-aged. Maybe early 20s at a stretch, but they skew on the young side. The impact that this has is to imply, not intentionally, I would say, in the case of the vast majority of these, but the way the archetype is used, there is an implication in that pattern that it's something that they're going to grow out of, that they're not going to keep being this way. That's something that's sort of been in my mind ever since there's a Canadian comic named Elvira Kurt. One of the things she talked about as a lesbian was that she had a grace period growing up because she was a tomboy. And so her parents didn't think anything about maybe her sexuality is leaning a certain way because it's okay for her to be a tomboy, as long as she doesn't stay that way and eventually grows out of it. And look at that, she never did. Here's another thing, though. The ones that aren't notably young, teens, early 20s, they're unmarried. They're unattached. So some of the prime examples, Vasquez from Aliens, and yes, Vasquez is a problematic character because the actress is in brownface, but that's not the topic for this video. But Vasquez, not excessively young, but in the military, with no hint of an interest sexually in any of the men around her. Brienne of Tarth, who, while she has her crush on Jaime, and holy crap did they screw that up by the end, she seems to have accepted in her life, at least in the TV show, I haven't read the books, I'm a fake geek person, but she seems to have accepted that she is not going to have romantic entanglements. That was the price of getting to do these other things that she wanted to do. I mentioned A League of Their Own. Now, first of all, A League of Their Own, actually one of my favorite movies ever. And that's big for me because I hate sports movies. But I love A League of Their Own. Love it to death. Now, Kit is the tomboy character. And she's very much focused on the game, on the progress, on getting better. Her sister, played by Gina Davis, Dottie, she is much more feminine, much less boyish, and she's married. Again, feeding into this notion that to be a tomboy is not just to embrace traditionally masculine things, but is to miss out on feminine things. It's actually one of the plot points going on with the character in the original Bad News Bears. She worries that her interest in sports and guy things means that guys won't ever want to date her because they'll see her as one of the guys. And this does, on an undercurrent, get reinforced by the fact that these characters are nearly always unattached, or there is the notion that if they are ever going to become attached, that they need to give up some of their more masculine-leaning independence. Again, kind of comes up with Joe March.
I'm so sick of people saying that love is just all a woman is fit for. I'm so sick of it. But I'm so lonely.
So there's this recurring idea that to choose to be a tomboy is to give up a lot of the, again, traditional sort of stereotypical defining life choices of a woman. And of course, that kind of binary is garbage and nonsense. And nobody has to give up romance or love or makeup just because they like to swing a bat or would rather have a beer than a Cosmo. But that is really kind of the recurring thing that goes on with these characters. And there's one other element that I want to bring up, and again, sort of by way of a comparison. Tomboys, while there are these undercurrents that I've talked about, are pretty much always shown to be positive characters, at least all the ones that I could come up with and think of. It's very rarely shown as a bad thing in and of itself, except where it possibly clashes with a desire for the more feminine things in life in addition to that. But there is a flip side to that. What about doing it the other way? What about girly boys? What about sissies? What about the male characters who exhibit an interest in the feminine? Well, again, in the Cade coding video, I pointed out there that on its own is enough to code them as gay without needing to pair them with a potential partner the way you would have to do with a female character. But more than that, that is something traditionally in life, in media, is a source of mockery, of ridicule, of dread, of humor. We, as an audience in pop culture, love the tomboy. And we hate the sissy. And I think the reason is the same. And I hope I don't ruin anyone's favorite character archetype by pointing this out, but it's an undercurrent of misogyny in both cases. I do believe that a big part of the reason why tomboys in media, and in my experience in life in general, are okay, but girly boys are not, is because of the inherent underlying, still very much baked into our culture notion that men are superior to women. So if a woman or a young girl wants to be more like a man, oh, that's cute. That's aspirational. She wants to better herself. But if a man shows an interest in feminine things, if a boy wants to be more like a girl, that's a downgrade. That's not aspirational. That is a man choosing to be less than what he was born to be. A woman trying to be more like a man, well, that's wonderful. Look at it, upward trajectory. This is a downward trend in the eyes of misogyny. He's choosing to be less. And that is a threat to the misogynistic concepts of masculinity, much more so than a girl trying to be more like a boy. Because that, in many ways, is masculinity affirming. Well, of course she wants to be a little bit more like a boy. Boys are the best. They have it great. They have it awesome. That's fine. Boy wants to be more like a girl. What? But he has all the good stuff. He has what he's supposed to be. Why would he give that up? And those questions make people uncomfortable. And it threatens the foundational assumption that masculine is superior to feminine. I wish I had another note to sort of come to a conclusion on, but I do think that it's worth pointing out because these notions, misogynistic, patriarchal notions, are baked into our consciousness as a society, as creators, as an entertainment engaging audience. These things are so omnipresent that we don't realize how deep they run. And that wasn't the reason I wanted to do this video, but I knew I had to talk about that and had to kind of build to get to that point with this video. But again, I want to stress, this is not a call to stop having tomboy characters. Tomboys are wonderful characters, and they can be great. Jo March is a phenomenal character. Merida is a fantastic character. I don't like Brave. I don't think it's a good movie, but Merida's great. Go-Go is a lot of fun in Big Hero 6. These characters are wonderful. I don't want them to go anywhere. But like so many things, we can still enjoy them, but it is important to recognize where these things come from, where these archetypes, these tropes, these characteristics, why they exist in the form that they do. And I hope that hearing my perspective on them doesn't ruin them for you, because I still enjoy these characters, and I hope you do too, but you'll be able to do so maybe with a better, possibly, if I might be so bold, deeper understanding. So that's it for this one. Tomboys. Do you have a favorite tomboy character in film, TV, or literature? Or video games? You know what? Go that route. That works. If you do, or if you have any other thoughts you care to share, drop something on down in the comments. Let's talk about it. You know the usual things you can do, all of which help me out. There's liking, subscribing, sharing this around, helping me out on Patreon, but you also don't have to do any of it, because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.